Do you ever wonder how groups are formed? How are allegiances formed to a school, a sports team, or a political ideology? Well, in the 1960s, psychologist Muzafer Sharif was wondering the same thing. He came up with the realistic conflict theory, which hypothesized that group conformity forms because of competition for resources. The most logical way to test this, he thought? Start a summer camp, of course. Sharif brought two groups of 12-year-old boys to Robbers Cave State Park and had each group bond independently at first. The teams even had to make team names, such as the Eagles and the Rattlers. Then Sharif brought the groups together and had them compete in a variety of field games for prizes. During this period, hostility between the two groups of boys grew quickly with name-calling, taunting, and aggression, even to the point of ransacking each other's belongings. The two groups became so aggressive that the researchers had to split the groups of boys apart. All this from arbitrary groups that were assigned at the beginning of the summer. In the final phase of Sharif's experiment, he sought to bring the two groups together. But how could he do that when the boys hated each other so? Sharif decided that the two groups would only be able to cooperate if they had to in order to achieve some greater goal that neither group could do alone. The first superordinate goal was to fix the water supply, which had suddenly stopped running to the camp. The boys had to work together from both sides to find a solution to get the water running back to the camp. After solving a few superordinate problems together, Sharif saw that intergroup conflict decreased and that the boys were even all sitting together at the dinner table. Sharif's study was among many to kick off this research on in-group bias, with it only resonating more and more to real-life issues today. So in this video, we will try to answer this question even further by looking at how are groups formed, how does in-group bias become crystallized, and how does intergroup conflict arise?
Picture this. Humans are walking categorization machines. We've been organizing the world into neat little boxes, us and them, for basically forever. Why? Well, psychologists say it's rooted in our ancient survival instincts. Back in the day, sticking with our people made life safer, easier, and ensured we didn't get eaten by lions. The result? A natural tendency to favor our own group, even when the stakes are as low as Team Pineapple on Pizza versus Team It's an Abomination. So, just how are groups formed? Step 1. Social categorization. Hey, you look like me. Ever notice how your brain loves to put people into categories? Athlete, student, Swiftie. It's like sorting your Spotify playlist. It simplifies a chaotic world. Henry Tajfel and John Turner formalized this in the 1970s. They called it social categorization. It's the process of mentally filing people into groups based on race, gender, nationality, or religion. Basically, whatever trait makes your brain say, that tracks. But here's the twist. Once we put ourselves into a box, I'm a student for instance, we start acting the part. You pull all-nighters, drink gallons of coffee. Suddenly that free pizza at the library is the best meal of your life. Why? Because being a student comes with norms, and you're conforming sometimes without even realizing it. Step 2, social identification. This is my group, and I'm proud of it. Once you're categorized, you don't just belong to the group. You become the group. You're not just on the soccer team, you're a soccer player. You live, breathe, and probably dream in cleats. Emotionally, this is powerful stuff. Your group becomes part of your self-esteem. If your group thrives, you thrive. If your group takes an L, well, let's not think about it. That's why people defend their favorite sports teams like their lives depend on it. Step 3, social comparison. We're better than them. Obviously. Here's when things get heated. Once we've joined a group, we start comparing it to other groups. And guess what? We really want our group to come out on top. This leads to a little thing called in-group favoritism, where you hype up your group, and out-group derogation, where you don't hype up the others. Now, for the wild part. Tajfel proved it takes almost nothing to trigger this behavior. In his minimal group paradigm experiments, he split 14-year-old boys into completely meaningless groups. Overestimators versus underestimators of dots on a screen, or fans of a random abstract painting by Paul Klee versus Wassily Kandinsky. And yet, these kids, who had zero emotional attachment to their groups, still showed favoritism for their own and acted biased against each other. They handed out rewards to their teammates and stiffed the other guys just because of a label. This blew people's minds. Up until then, researchers thought prejudice and bias stemmed from big, dramatic stuff, like personal rivalries or deep societal tensions. Nope. Turns out, sometimes all you need is a category. Okay, So let's not pretend that forming groups is just about random labels and arbitrary categories. Sometimes real-world factors, say how smart you are, might just tip the scales a bit. Enter the 2018 study by researcher Fabian Patzel and Rupert Salzgruber. They wanted to see how people behave in groups formed by actual performance, like intelligence, versus totally random minimal groups. Spoiler, it gets awkward. Participants were sorted into groups based on their performance on a multiple-choice test measuring intelligence. Simple enough, right? These groups came with labels that screamed, hey, you're either super smart or, well, not. One set of groups knew exactly why they were grouped. If you scored high, you're officially part of the elite high cognitive ability squad. If you didn't, well, welcome to the low cognitive ability group. Ouch. Another set of groups had the same high score, low score sorting, but instead of calling it what it was, the researchers slapped on arbitrary labels like Klee and Kandinsky. No mention of intelligence, just a random name based on a painting reference to keep things mysterious. Voila, a minimal group was born. Participants in these groups were tasked with awarding points to other people, either members of their own group or the other group. Sounds innocent enough, right? Wrong. This game was designed to stir the pot and reveal just how much people love their own teams. Here's what the researchers uncovered. When groups were labeled by intelligence, the high cognitive ability group showed significant in-group favoritism. In fact, more in-group bias than the low cognitive ability group. Why? Social comparison. When you're told you're part of the smart group, you feel a surge of pride and want to stick it to the other guys. It's all about reinforcing that warm, fuzzy feeling of superiority. However, the low cognitive ability group, meanwhile, wasn't exactly hyping up the high achievers. Nope, they also still favored their own group, just not as much as the high ability group seemed to like to do. Here's where it gets really interesting. When the groups were given arbitrary labels, Team Klee versus Team Kandinsky, both groups still showed in-group favoritism. Because apparently, humans will cling to just about anything to create a sense of belonging. But, and here's the kicker, the low cognitive ability minimal group showed more in-group bias than the high cognitive ability counterparts. That's right. When the labels didn't mean anything, the less intelligent group members were more likely to rally around their team and exclude others. Basically, when there's no real label or reason that the in-group is being created, it seems as though people who have been categorized as being not as intelligent are more likely to create these in-groups. Interpret this how you want, but maybe that's why Tajfel's experiment on a bunch of kids worked so well.
So we form groups with people who are similar to us. That might not be that crazy to understand. But did you know that being part of a group can also change our perception? No, I don't mean hallucinations or anything like that, but one study found that being part of a group can change how we perceive actions of members of our group compared to members of an outsider group. Pascal Ballenberg and his colleagues at the University of Queensland wanted to look at what brain processes underlie in-group bias. They did this by assigning participants to groups, either red team or blue team, and making them judge the speed in a button-pressing task of both their in-group or the out-group. They hypothesized that participants would show in-group bias and would judge the actions of their own members as faster than actions of members in the out-group. To understand, though, what the underlying processes behind this are, they needed an extra step, an fMRI. They wanted to look at whether the reason for in-group bias was due to social cognitive decision-making processes, or if there was also neural processes underlying perception action that led to in-group bias. So they did a second experiment using fMRIs. In some trials, only one video is shown of either in-group team or out-group team doing the button-pressing task. This was to measure perception of action of in-group team or out-group team separately. They hypothesized that participants who show in-group bias here and perceive actions of in-group team members differently from actions of out-group team members will have differences in activity in brain regions involved in perception action. Specifically, they expect to see increased activity in the superior temporal sulcus, the STS, involved in social biological movements, and the inferior parietal lobe, the IPL, and ventral parietal lobe, the VPM, which are involved in frontoparietal mirror circuits, which is as it sounds, when specialized neurons mimic the actions and behaviors of others. On the other trials, participants viewed both in-group team and out-group team actions and were asked to make judgments about who was faster again. They hypothesized that participants who show greater in-group bias will have increased activity in regions associated with decision-making, social perception, and cognitive control, such as the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, the infrontal gyrus, the IFG, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So, what did they find? They found that participants did view the actions of in-group team members to be faster than members of the out-group team, and that participants who showed this in-group bias also showed increased activity in the left IPL when viewing in-group members compared to out-group members. They saw that this activity both in the trials where participants viewed one video and in the trials where they viewed both. This indicates that in-group bias has to do with brain processes involved in perception action. Specifically, the IPL is involved in mirror circuits, which is when certain neurons mimic the actions and behaviors of others. Previous research has also shown that these simulation or mirroring processes in the brain are influenced by social relationships. Specifically, mirror neuron circuits are stronger when viewing an action of an in-group member compared to an out-group member. This is why participants have a higher activation of IPL or mirror neuron circuits when viewing in-group actions, and is why they perceive the actions of in-group members to be faster than that of out-group members. They didn't find a difference in activity at the decision-making step, indicating that bias is at the perception level. This all indicates that brain processes involved in perception action may be an underlying factor of our favoritism towards in-group members. So why does this matter? Well, our perceptions of others can affect how we value their ideas and opinions. This can also influence how we think about the world, specifically how we value and view members of outgroups.
Let's dive into why in-group bias is more than just awkward office cliques or your weirdly competitive friend group. It can actually be a massive driver of aggression and prejudice in the world. Connecting this bias to real aggression is tricky. Ethics, anyone? But in 2011, researchers Mina Sakara, Matthew Botvinnik, and Susan Fisk took a bold step into this messy arena. Their mission? To explore if the brain's reward systems, those feel-good zones lighting up when you win, could also correlate with a willingness to harm members of the outgroup. And what better way to stir up some good old-fashioned rivalry than sports? Forget abstract group labels. This study tapped into one of the fiercest rivalries in baseball, Yankees fans versus Red Sox fans. Researchers predicted that fans would root for their team victories and, unsurprisingly, also enjoy their rival's failures, even when the rival lost to a third party. Fans would grimace at their own team's failures and scowl at their rival's successes. Most importantly, these emotional responses would correlate with a willingness to harm the rival group. Sounds intense, right? And how do you test something like this without starting an actual brawl in the lab? The fake game experiment. The researchers created a fake baseball game using screenshots from ESPN's Gamecast, crafting 6 types of plays. Favorite team succeeds against the rival. Rival fails against the favorite team. Rival succeeds against the favorite team. Favorite team fails against the rival. Rival fails against a neutral team. Plays involving 2 neutral teams. Participants viewed these plays while inside an fMRI scanner, rating their feelings of anger, pain, and pleasure. Then, 2 weeks later, researchers hit them with a survey asking how likely they were to throw food, threaten, shove, or even hit a rival fan. Here's what went down. Behavioral results. Fans reacted exactly how you'd expect. Positive plays made them feel pleasure. Negative plays made them angrier and more upset. Interestingly, though, the Schadenfreude control condition also made fans feel pleasure. But the fun didn't stop there. No results. fMRI scans showed that when fans watched their team succeed or their rival fail, their ventral striatum lit up. The ventral striatum, often called the brain's reward system, isn't just about candy bars or pay raises. It's also linked to a delightfully sinister emotion called Schadenfreude, that sweet, sweet pleasure you feel when someone else, especially a rival, fails. This isn't just about sports rivalries or laughing at your nemesis tripping over a curb. The study reveals something deeper. In-group bias doesn't just affect how we feel, it shapes what we're willing to do. When we see the other side fail, it can activate the same reward circuits that light up when we succeed, and that satisfaction can translate into real-world harm, from minor aggression, like shoving, to larger-scale violence. Schadenfreude isn't harmless. While it might be fun to enjoy a rival's misfortune, this study shows that it's tied to a willingness to act on these feelings. Understanding how and why in-group bias leads to aggression isn't just academic. It's essential. From sport rivalries to political polarization to ethnic violence, the same mechanisms are at play. The brain reward systems don't just celebrate us, they're primed to take satisfaction in the downfall of them. Our takeaways. Today, it's more important than ever to understand in group bias. Our nation and the world is extremely polarized, and if we want to find a way to move forward, we need to first look inwards at our own biases. Researching in group bias this semester has allowed us to better understand how we may be able to tackle this problem.
Through this research, we have learned that fostering empathy, promoting diverse interactions, and encouraging critical self-reflection are essential steps toward reducing the negative impacts of in-group bias. These strategies not only help bridge divides, but also contribute to creating more inclusive and understanding communities.
Ultimately, addressing in group bias is not just about solving polarization, it's about building a foundation for collaboration, mutual respect, and shared progress. If we are willing to challenge our assumptions and step out of our comfort zone, we can begin to break down the barriers that divide us and work towards a more united and equitable society. Bye.